Hi, everyone, and welcome to this special episode of the Passive House Podcast, recorded in Tarrytown, New York at the PhiusCon 2021 Passive House Conference. Before we get started, I want to thank Phius for putting on the conference and for coordinating with us on these interviews, as well as NYSERDA for serving as conference partner with Phius and community partner with us here at the Passive House Accelerator. Thank you, too, to Rockwell North America. Their generous support underwrote all of these interviews as well as our coverage of the conference. So with that, please enjoy my interview with Tessa Bradley of Artisans Group and Graham Irwin of Essential Habitat Architecture. Welcome, Graham Irwin and Tessa Bradley, to this interview. I can't wait to interview you. You are both old and dear friends, so this is going to be awesome. Thanks for sitting down.
You're welcome.
Always.
Glad to be here.
So we're doing a special interview at the PhiusCon conference in Tarrytown right now in 2021, and this is the first day of the conference. So you are both here to participate as speakers on a prefab panel, right?
Correct. Yeah.
So I would love to dive into a little bit about what you plan on sharing during that panel, but I think it'd be fun first to dive into a little bit of your origin story around Passive House. Like, how were you introduced to Passive House? What was that like?
Well, Graham got introduced to it first. I think you should go first, Graham.
Okay, so
He's also older, so he should go first.
yeah. Around 2007, and I've got to try to contain this as much as I can. I was always concerned with environmentalism, and I was doing construction and getting more involved in design, and I kept thinking, like, why can't you make a house that needs no fossil fuels to run? And I have an undergrad in physics, which is just, about as useful as an undergrad in philosophy, but just enough to make me dangerous. And I started doing calculations, and it was pretty clear, like, oh, PV won't work. You don't get enough sun in the winter. That's not going to work. And I thought, oh, well, solar thermal, no, that won't work. And then I started thinking, well, I've got to get more solar gain, and again, it's this transition a lot of people go through about, like, from production to conservation. But I'm like, oh, passive solar, you're harvesting as much of that winter sun directly as you can. So I was self-educating myself, that's great. Getting all these library books, and there are all these books from the 70s about passive solar and
you went to the
earth
library?
ships. Yeah,
That's so cute.
I had like, it was kind of, I guess there was internet, but there wasn't that, it was a lot of library books. And I remember I got a fairly modern one from Vermont about doing passive solar houses. And this guy had this thing where he used CMU bricks all on their side, like horizontally, with all the channels lined up. And he would put that in the floor and then blow a fan through it so he could harvest more heat. And I was like, okay, whatever. And then in the back, it had a worksheet where you could calculate how much insulation and stuff you needed. Like, it had a whole workbook where you would fill it out by hand with a calculator. And I thought, oh, I'm going to put this into a spreadsheet. It would be really convenient if this energy model were in a spreadsheet. And anyway, like maybe a month later, this architect in Berkeley who had been living in Austria came back and did a Passive House retrofit, and he presented on Passive House. And I was also going to all these local kind of green building presentations, and they're all little pieces like ventilation's good, and I'd be like, oh, okay, I get that, but how does that fit with this other thing? And I was seeking like the unified theory, right? Because it was all these disparate pieces but not put together. And I sat in the Passive House thing, and I still didn't know that much, but I saw it, and I'm like, there's something to this. Then I became the annoying guy. I still kept going to these other things, and I'd put up my hand, and they'd be like, ventilation. I'm like, what about Passive House? And the people would be like, oh, that's a European thing. I hear it's really good. I don't know anything about it. So that, again, made me think maybe I was on to something. And then I'm almost done, I promise. I remember I was
by the story, Graham.
I was at a class about ventilation, and the instructor brought up a slide of airtightness requirements in various countries. And of course, the US was not on there because we didn't know what that was. And blah, 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 and Norway and this and that and the other. And I put my hand up again and I said, oh, what about Passive House? I think it's 0.6. And the instructor was like, no, it can't be that low. Is that natural or ACH 50? And I didn't know, but it bugged me. And again, so 2007, I had a Palm Treo before the pre-iPhone, but it did have internet access. And I knew about the Phius website, and I knew they had the standard on the front page. And so I just went to that at break to figure out whether it was natural or ACH 50 I was talking about. And they had, hey, we're doing a training.
You were like, oh.
And it was right at the, I had a residential design business, and everything was going to crap at that point, like the bubble burst.
Right.
And I just felt like, yeah. And then you had to go to Urbana, Illinois. I didn't know where that was. And you had to go 3 times over the summer. And I told my wife, I know this is a stretch, but I really feel like I need to do this. And so I had frequent flyer miles that I saved up and went to this thing. And the first training was absolute chaos because they had no admission criteria at all. And they didn't think anyone was going to want to, or very many people were going to want to go. So they had a PayPal registration, and they were set up for 30 people. And I think the enrollment was at like 45 before they took it down. So it was just overfilled, crazy. People didn't know how to use their computers and the whole thing. But by the end, by the third session, I had like the best friends I've ever had in my life. And that's my origin story.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Yeah. And then the next year I started training people, and I will spare you, I'll spare Tessa my impressions of her origin, and you can take it yourself.
At age 22, and you're. I'm really tempted to share my origin story like in a sentence just to make you feel like an asshole for taking that long.
It's not going to work. It's not going to work. Do you see the guilt on my face? There is none.
It gives me that look a lot. It's very terribly unguilty. So enter Graham into the training session in Seattle, which I attended. And I'm not going to do the mental math of how old I was, but I think I was somewhere between 22 and 24. I was quite young. But I had seen Katrin Klingenberg speak at a library in Seattle. And
that was a momentous speech, I think.
A momentous speech. Yeah. And afterwards, I came up and asked if I could join her class, and she said, well, what do you do? And I said, well, I run a small, design portion of a firm in Olympia, and I have a degree in sustainable architecture. And, I had been doing, fairly complex homes for a couple of years, actually, like SIPs, ICFs, integrated with geothermal and photovoltaic
You're like
systems
the original Passive House prodigy from the Northwest.
Well, it was just so systems heavy. That was the thing that was like such a bummer about it. And you would spend so much money on these systems, and the houses just didn't perform that much better because we just didn't know what knobs we should be turning to get there, Like much like Graham, I felt like I was grasping, and I felt like there was some of the story, but it wasn't cohesive. And what Katrin presented felt like this like more encompassing approach to what we were trying to do. So I went to her course, and I was really intimidated because I was in there with people who were really smart, like Graham, who was helping train, and Joe Heron from Heliotrope, and Dan Whitmore. And I sat next to Dan, actually, for our trainings all 3 times, and made incredible friends and was super impressed. It was also a shit show. Like, even though it was the same training, it was like we were converting things from metric to English and back. People's computers weren't working, and people were there who were angry, about what was being said. And
I remember that.
It was, it was amazing. It was amazing. And also things had gone to hell. For the firm I worked for, the Artisans Group had gone from, 30 people to 5 people in the course of 6 months. So
the Great Recession was...
Great Recession.
I mean, it pushed so many of us to Passive House in funny ways, yeah.
It did, I agree. And I, came back, and from that training, my last training, it was also three days, I think, over the summer. And I remember telling my then boss, Randy Foster, who's an amazing man, was an incredible partner to me, that I was going to quit and start a passive house, company. And he was like, well, that sounds pretty cool. And he immediately signed up for the next training, which was in Portland, with Sam Hagerman and Skylar and a bunch of other super great people. And he got on board and I bought in, and we became 50-50 owners of the Artisans Group. And within a few months, we were building our first one, which I'd leveraged a disgruntled design client that had had a bad experience with their builder into building the first one. And they were really smart, amazing clients, still friends to this day. And they must have a 10-year-old passive house or something like that at this point.
That's amazing.
That still works beautifully and looks incredible, and they love it in Olympia. And the rest is history. We started designing and building passive houses almost exclusively. We did that for almost 10 years. And then we stopped being design build and became just an architecture firm. Brought on our third partner, Rusa Cassell, incredible architect. And her and I have bought out Randy actually last year. Randy has been sort of spooling down, and he's heading for retirement this spring. He's really excited.
Oh, that's great for Randy.
And it's been a really successful succession story. And Rusa and I's business has really taken off. I think we're sort of a rare bird, being 100% women-owned in architecture in this industry. So that's sort of it.
And you have projects across the Northwest, passive house projects.
Yeah.
And Graham, you have projects throughout California.
Yeah.
Beyond probably a little bit for both of you.
Yeah,
I think we're licensed in like 6 states. Yeah. We've got work in Austin, Texas, and Virginia, and Vancouver, BC, Oregon, Washington,
That's awesome.
Pacific Northwest.
That's awesome.
Mostly the Pacific Northwest.
I mean, you have this great portfolio of work that you've developed over the last 10 years, and you've been there since the early days to where we're at now, and now you're moving into things like prefabrication. So maybe we could dive into that a little bit, and how you're engaging with prefab, and what you're going to share about that. What are the lessons, or what makes you excited about it in prefab?
So I am, and it may not be my doing, but I may be a bit of an imposter in this prefab session.
Because, that's so shocking.
It is shocking. And look how guilty I feel about it.
Yeah, it's that face again. There it is.
It never causes trouble.
For 2 reasons. One, I'm talking about a concept, so it's a proposal.
Everything starts
And secondly, it's a modular design. So it would very much lend itself to either a modular or a panelized delivery. But the idea behind it is that it's a proposal for mass customization. So a home, it's designed for upzoning, single-family residential properties in California now. They've essentially ended single-family zoning.
Super exciting.
So it's a building that's pre-designed for economy of scale, but it's intended to be flexible for both community needs and the owner's needs. So it's designed in a kind of almost like Lego block way, in modules so that you can decide, what size units you need and how many units there are.
I love how your design solution, which I'm very impressed by the way. I love how it's sort of like you cutting in line. Like that's like my favorite thing about it is like I feel like I've been like working on this prefab thing just freaking forever, like with all these baby steps to get to the point that I could do the thing that you're proposing to do. And you're just like, hey, I've got this cool idea. And we're like, shit, that's awesome. That's where we're heading. It's really great.
It's a proposal, and it isn't so much about delivery as it is design. Although I'm totally open to the delivery method.
Could be prefab, could be modular.
It could be site built. I mean, I think at economy of scale size, it should be something mechanized. Yeah. But I'll go even further out on a limb with this, and I will suggest that I really believe with projects that you need to set one target, be very clear what your goal is, and everything else should support that goal. So in my case with this building, it's about global warming impact, low global warming, high quality housing. So that's the goal. And if panelization works or or modular works to that goal, that's fine. But those things need to help meet that goal in the most effective manner.
Yeah, that clarity seems really important. Yeah.
But I think they put me in there because they couldn't figure out where else to stick me.
They didn't know where to put you.
Pretty normal. I mean, I'm
pretty
used to that.
So
yeah,
that makes sense.
We have more of like a grassroots, I think, relationship with prefab, in the sense that Randy and I were really interested in it really early in Passive House. I think we built 3 Passive Houses on site before we rented a space and began to prefab our own wall system design. Not dissimilar from the ones that you see like from Collective Carpentry and things like that. They're pretty similar. So we were designing our own walls, building them with our own crew, and then taking them on site to build our custom Passive Houses and put them in place.
Right.
So we did, I think we did 4 or 5 that way with our own systems. We even did one that had a modular core because it was a remote build on the San Juan Islands, Shaw Island, in the Pacific Northwest. And so we put this kind of like mechanical, had the kitchen, bathrooms, mechanical room, put that in the center of the building. It was modular. And then, put the prefab walls around it. Dan Whitmore was a builder at the time, and he actually did some of the site work on that with us. So, we came to it because we thought it was just so freaking cool, but we lacked the ability to scale, that approach. We couldn't, really justify renting the space or keeping a crew tooled and ready to do that for a couple houses a year. And as soon as we started to try and do it for other people, it became very clear that we were just trying to build Passive Houses. We weren't trying to be a commodity kind of producer. We're not a manufacturer, and we don't have training in that. We don't know how to do it well, in my opinion.
Hence the whole have one target and aim at that.
Yes, it's a good approach.
Right.
So we kind of shut that down pretty quickly, but never really lost our prefab hopes. And then we came along Collective Carpentry a couple years ago and have been working with them ever since. So I would say steadily, probably 50 to 60% of our custom Passive Houses are designed to be prefab now, and I think that number is going to balloon this year. So we have a couple of completed projects, one of which will be the case study I'm going to talk about in the conference session with Graham. And we see a lot of potential there. And we're working on scaling that up with them too. Rusa and I recently bought a new office building in Tumwater. And we're doing a small scale energy retrofit on that right now. Nothing to the Passive House standard, but we're really just getting it comfortable, getting the energy usage down as much as we can for the areas we need to touch anyway. But we're really getting our company into this small building, getting it functional, and we're building in front of that building because the lot is perfectly laid out for this. It's in a very urban setting on a main street in Tumwater, Washington. We're going to be building 2 office spaces and 6 apartments above, which will be Passive House and prefabricated with Collective Carpentry.
Nice.
So
Awesome.
I feel like we're using our experience in the residential realm, and we're starting to not only become developers ourselves, but also scale it up in a way that I could see the market actually running with.
And what are the advantages of prefab that you see for your Passive House practice?
Well, for us, I see a better product. I see something drier, more cleanly, more perfectly built, typically foam free, because I feel like you get lazy with site built, and oftentimes people will see that low hanging fruit in terms of immediate cost and go for the foam. And with prefab, nobody's prefabbing anything with foam in it. So it's a wonderful way to just take that step away from the cheapest way to build a Passive House, which I feel like we're doing more and more. The other thing I see is that the builders that build these prefab houses are skeptical at first about the cost because they see that shell cost and they go, I could do that for cheaper. But I think once they've built a Passive House on site and they see how much time and energy goes into all the pickup framing, all the air sealing, all the miscellaneous crap that happens around the actual frame up, I think they see that that's where most of the hours are. And that's really... that guesswork is taken out, I feel like, for prefab. So I feel like they limit their liability and they limit their cost, which that in itself, I think, can be a really good way for contractors to protect themselves as they're doing what can be very innovative, edgy work and be very costly to them, as they learn to do it.
It can be a smaller job for them, but a safer job.
Yeah. So I feel like the contractors, once they've done I've gotten lots of feedback like this from our contractors, that once they've done a prefab house with like collective carpentry, that they feel like the cost is apples to apples. They feel like when they're really honest about how much time it would have taken to do that on site, that it's just a wash. Yeah. And if it's just a wash, I'd rather have it faster and a better product.
Yeah, right.
I was going to say, another thing that appeals to me about prefabrication, and I'm sure Tessa would, I assume you would agree. I should never be sure she'll agree with anything I say. But when you design, as an architect, when you do passive house, you go into way more of the details than it's a very, ultimately a simple concept, but very intricate. And so there's a lot of work on detail and thinking through everything, not just in terms of will it work, but can it be constructed and all this stuff and be effective. And so my analogy is I almost feel like when I produce a design and construction documents for a passive house, it's like I've written a concerto, and then I need to turn to have it be built. And it's one thing, we don't have a lot of experienced passive house builders in our area, and from a design standpoint, you can work in a much wider geographical area than a builder can build anyway. So a lot of our projects are with first time or someone that has no passive house experience at all. So back to this concerto thing, right? So I hand the sheet music of the concerto off, and I feel like most of the time, if I'm lucky, I will get jazz musicians, right? Who can read music, and they'll play, they might play through once my tune.
And they're going to make some improvements.
If they're master improvisers, you'll be in good hands.
That's the best case scenario. Typically it's a garage band where they can't read the music at all, and it just gets tossed, and whatever gets built gets built. So the idea of panelization or prefabrication, where a lot of that uncertainty and again with built, and there are great builders who've never done this before, and they're enthusiastic and they want to learn, but it's always kind of the same learning curve, right. And it's always me like, I'm not a builder, but I've seen this before and I wouldn't do that, and then the next time they're like, oh yeah, you told me, and I'm like, yeah, but
we
just tired of doing this.
We just suffered that last
right.
one,
and I've done that. Yeah. I've got that scar numerous times.
I don't know about you, but I feel like it's actually like one of the hardest times to help people get these houses built, at least where I live, because builders are so busy, they're booked out. And a lot of the builders we've been working with that are wonderful passive house experienced builders, they're very booked out, and people don't want to wait 3 years to build their house. Mm-hmm. So I'm working with a lot of new builders for the first time this year. And the prefab takes an enormous amount of pressure off of them to be a passive house expert right out of the gate. Additionally, the passive house builders that are booked out are more willing to consider taking the project if it's prefab, because it's going to be a faster build.
Oh yeah, that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So it's more enticing for my experienced builders, and it's probably really the only way to be successful with my new builders.
Right. Yeah, that's compelling. Definitely.
It's good stuff.
Yeah. So we should probably wrap up with the last kind of question here, and so I think I'd like to leave it open to what are you hoping to get from the conference? What are you looking forward to the conference? Or what do you see on the horizon for yourself or for Passive House? So pretty open.
Being at the conference, I'm already getting what I hoped. I brought my son with me. He doesn't want to be on camera, but that's fine. So he's 12, so that's a really great bonding experience. But beyond that, just getting to see all these great people that I unfortunately don't get to see enough, and haven't gotten to see in 2 years anyway. On the horizon, I'm working on rebranding my firm. Ironically, I won't say away from Passive House, but less of an emphasis on Passive House up front, because I've come to the conclusion that I just need to establish that what I'm doing is great, and that people get Passive House. It comes with it. It's just there.
I like that approach. I think that's worked well for us.
Yeah.
People are like, oh, I like your design work. And we're like, well, great. Let us tell you about how we do that.
Yeah, and it's like the whole message is like you want this beautifully designed thing. It should perform as well as it looks.
Yeah.
Beautiful inside and out.
Yeah. And then on the other side of it, kind of in tandem with this presentation, I'm also working on what I call pocket production houses. So they're pre-designed with some flexibility, but it's the idea that affording people beautiful, high-performing, healthy, passive houses without them having to be all one-off custom projects. Because I don't even know the percentage of homes in the United States that are built with an architect involved at all is tiny.
It's got to be under 10%.
I think it's 1%.
It's
maybe.
so teeny.
It's something tiny. So we're not going to fix the situation we're in designing one at a time. We have to come up with mass production, mass customization, but
what was that thing
mass
Skylar,
production.
we were joking about with Skylar years ago where it was like saving the world one fancy ass house at a time.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah, I think that was our slogan for a little while.
I mean, I love custom design, and I have no desire to stop doing it.
Yeah.
But it
it's not
needs
scalable.
to be.
It's not for everybody.
It needs to be available, and everyone deserves to have
right.
this.
How do you leverage design to really?
Yeah, how do you get everyone
more?
in nice spaces?
Plus, if I could if I can design my thing and it gets built 10 or 100,000 times, I mean, that's pretty cool.
That would be good.
Yeah.
That would be good in many ways. That would be good, I imagine.
I would say, the takeaways that I'm here for are really similar to Graham's. I find it interesting how all of us working in our little beehives at home can come to such similar conclusions. Because we've got a couple things going on that are really similar. We have a Shopify portion of our website that we'll be rolling out here in the next few months.
Oh, cool.
That are pre-designed passive house house plans. We're actually going to start with a bunch of ADUs because we feel like that's a way we can address density right away. And you can watch for that because we're just working through the final details of the plan sets, and I'm working through the final details of the legality of selling plans at a national scale, which is it's exactly as tricky as you think it is. So,
I didn't think it was tricky, but now I'm starting to worry.
And I feel like I get so much out of these conferences. I just feel like I get so much out of the friendships and the inspiration. I feel like I get re-excited about what I'm doing every time I come. And it's always perfect timing. Like I'm always feel a little beat down or a little bit like, oh man, I wish we were doing this or that or doing more of it. I think Roos and I are both really inspired and enthused about our small multifamily project we're going to be developing. We've never done a multifamily passive house, although we have started to do a lot more multifamily generally this year. Our firm has grown a lot in the commercial and multifamily, realm. So I think we have a lot to learn for how to do, passive house apartments and how to do passive house offices. And I think we're really excited about that because we can learn on our own dime. We can learn, we can be a little bit more experimental, I think. Because, we don't have to make sure that we're flawlessly performing for a client. So I think that, so we have fresh energy, I think, around that at this conference. So we're like attending, workshops we might not have attended before and looking at products we would have never noticed before. And so it's kind of like, sort of like being into it for the first time a little bit, which is really fun.
That is cool.
Yeah, I think it's great to see everybody.
Yeah, it is.
I want to circle back for a moment to Tessa's origin story.
I was waiting.
Good. That's
So
right,
I
we glossed over
remember
that,
her.
didn't
I remember her being very young, very cool, very smart, and having bleach blonde hair.
I had like a mohawk. I had like a little faux hawk kind of thing.
I thought it was more like Amy Mann style, but maybe I'm wrong.
Those were my roller derby days.
Okay. And I remember there was someone who was super annoying, but it wasn't you. And we don't need to go into that.
I don't remember.
Yeah. someone was really annoying and angry, but it wasn't you.
I don't remember.
No, she was super cool. She was one of the smartest
I would like.
people
I would,
in the
I'm just going to lean
training,
into the
for
mic
sure.
here. I would like everyone to know that Graham Irwin said I'm not annoying.
Well, you weren't then. Things
You did
change.
make that clear,
Things
actually.
change.
That was awesome.
This will be the first Passive House conference that I won't be drinking at too. That's really weird.
Why is that, Tessa?
That's because I'm pregnant. I wanted everyone to know.
Congratulations.
They
Yeah.
don't think I've eaten a bunch of sandwiches. It's my first sober Passive House conference. That's new too.
I jokingly call her my annoying little sister because of how this whole thing started with us. And now I'm
it's
saying
plausible.
she's actually creeping up on adulthood in an alarming way.
When she's becoming a parent,
Yeah, I mean
that's a quick way to become an adult.
Well, unfortunately, not everyone, but
Right. It's certainly not guaranteed.
Some people-
I can speak from personal experience.
But I had a bit of a misspent youth, I'll be honest. And I remember seeing Tessa at her age, and I was
You're like,
wow,
oh my God.
talking about precocious.
I know.
I was like,
know.
not twice your age at the time, but I was like, wow, you may have missed some
I didn't
interesting
misspend my
stories
youth.
or
I
whatever.
misspent
But
some of my 30s, but back on track.
anyhow,
Guys, this is awesome. Great chat, and it's so good to be with you.
you
know,
too.
It is.
so
Thanks for
thanks.
for
Old
interviewing
friends.
me.
Yeah.
Good reunion.